Good evening, everyone. I'm Kristin Battestella for the HorrorAddicts.net Online Writers Conference. You may know me as Kbatz when we're talking about some crazy crafting or some frightening flicks, but tonight we're actually going to do a nice video writing prompt. Okay, we're going to attempt this. This should be fun and fascinating at the same time. This idea came about from this little set I found at the Dollar Tree, of all places, if you want to pick up copies for your classroom yourself. It's called Writing Fiction, Writing Prompts for Grades 4 to 6. So we are going to step back a minute and pretend that we are writing like we are 10 years old, because maybe it could be a helpful exercise, maybe not. We'll find out. So this set is actually a picture on one side and then the prompt on the other side. I should remember to show these for you, but I don't know if they're going to appear very well on the screen for the writing. So I'm going to read each one aloud and we're going to discuss them. And please, again, feel free to comment in the thread and share your thoughts and ideas and everything with us, because that is the whole point of the HorrorAddicts.net Online Writers Conference, if I can say it 3 times fast. We're going to leave our videos and our threads and our workshops to you, and you can comment at your leisure in your PJs. So this one here is apparently some kind of rugged fisherman. Interesting. It says, fiction is a story that a writer makes up or creates in the form of a short story or novel. Sometimes maybe we even need to reiterate the definition for ourselves. There are many types of fiction. Fiction can have strange settings and characters, including talking animals and creatures such as mermaids that exist only in legend. Imagine the fisherman's boat capsizing in a storm. Tossed overboard, he is swept to the gates of an underwater city where he meets sea creatures dressed and behaving like humans. Describe this fictional scene. Now this does sound kind of juvenile and kind of preposterous, and that's okay. Maybe if you write fantasy, it's something simple or old hat. Maybe sometimes it's okay to revisit something old and how can we work on it and make it something new. And maybe if you don't write fantasy, sometimes maybe it's a good exercise to give it a whirl, because maybe that's one of the things that I love about genre, why even when I try and write straight fiction, it always ends up as something fantastic and crazy or scary, is because I love the idea that genre can say things that regular fiction maybe cannot, that you can veil things and express things in different ways. So even if you write straight fiction, maybe trying to even just attempt an exercise in fantastical elements maybe could be beneficial to you as well. This is a lovely person on a bicycle. He's actually got some really nice arm muscles right there. I'm jealous. It's fascinating. I wonder where he could be going and what he could be doing. A story must be told by someone called a narrator. That is another simplistic thing that how often do we tend to forget how important sticking in a viewpoint and a specific narration is. Although the author writes the story, the author is not necessarily the narrator. That's another thing that I expressly hate as a reader. Remember, as a writer, you're supposed to be a reader, if not more of a reader than you are a writer. And one of the frustrating things when you're a reader is when you hear the author. Oh, but at the same time, an author is supposed to have an author voice. But when you're a reader, you don't want to hear the author overbearing on the story, right? Writing's complicated, isn't it? Let's be honest. Sometimes the main character is the narrator. This narration is called a first-person point of view, using I, me, and my to tell the story. Viewpoints are another exercise. Sometimes when we're writing something and we're struggling and then we realize, oh, we're in the wrong point of view. Maybe the focus is this character that we should be talking about. Maybe for my genre, this should not be a first-person point of view. Maybe for what I'm writing, this should be. Sometimes it's easier, particularly maybe obviously when people are doing like memoir kind of fiction. That has a technical name, doesn't it? When you're in a memoir that's like a fictionalized account. I don't remember. Not my genre. But obviously maybe it's a good way if you're initially writing to not worry about viewpoint, to do things just in I, me, my point of views. In the first person point of view, write a fun story of this bicyclist's first day on his new job, delivering letters and small packages on the busy streets of New York. Includes several mishaps. So, now, I've done a couple workshops here talking about using pictures and visualizations, or actually using objects and experiences to really embellish your writing. And reading this just reminded me, now we've got these kind of action cameras. So who's to say that you shouldn't put a little camera on a bicycle and go have the experience before you write it down? That sounds very fascinating. And a bicyclist may be something that people take for granted. In certain cities, bicycling is the way to go. I mean, a car would be impossible, but being on a little bicycle, carrying a lot of stuff, that could be kind of dangerous and perilous. Of course, I automatically start to think that of all the blood and gore that could ensue, but that's okay. Oh, here is a lovely picture. Look at that one. Now, I love this image alone because it is very specific of a time and place. I don't think that there isn't anyone who looks at this and maybe isn't aware of the time of when that takes place, which is kind of interesting in itself, just to be like, oh, you know what, this isn't, the mid-19th century. Okay, this may be, the year 3000, and we've all gone back to, absurd decorum for some inexplicable reason that you're going to write about, right? Historical fiction is writing that is based on actual history but is not pure fact. Well, that's a whole other subset, because now we've got alternate histories and everything like that. Imagine this couple during a specific period of United States history. Write a few paragraphs of their story as historical fiction, mixing true facts of the historical setting with characters and plot that are made up. Use dialogue. Okay. I think historical fiction is very difficult because there is so much of the facts available. So it takes a lot of research. You have to know what you're talking about. And I think that's dialogue, I think, is key. Another thing that we have to remember, we can't have our ye old kind of Victorian people, saying things like, and being down with lingo and things like that and up with the tech, so there's a fine balance between cliche kind of vernacular, but it is definitely, I think, a practice that we all need to work on from time to time, where we need to make sure we're getting the dialogue correct, but not so much that it is, cliche. And particularly if you're doing something like this that had a Southern accent, I would think. But you don't want to be cliche and hammy, and it becomes difficult to read if you're trying to read the kind of slang, like every line. So that kind of, again, that balance of research and dialogue, and particularly, when characters sound different. I mean, he could be a gentleman from somewhere else, and she could be a Southern belle, who knows, where you have the dialogue has to match who the people are, which these sound very simplistic, but as I'm reading them and as I'm thinking of these suggestions, and I want to hear your suggestions tossed back, some of these basic things are really easier said than done, like keeping your first person viewpoint, isn't it? Speaking of, here is a lovely, he is not Bob Ross, although I guess he wishes, but he needs the hair and the happy little clouds, right? But when we think of a painter, maybe certain images are invoked. When a fiction writer tells a story through one or more of the characters' minds, using words like he or she, this is called a third-person viewpoint. Now, we had the one earlier that was saying I, me, my for first-person viewpoint. And now this has he or she for third-person viewpoint. Now, number one is when we are writing, how many times do we have the editor making sure to correct us and tell us that we have to stay in a viewpoint? And for one, sometimes you make a mistake and you're telling a scene that's not in that person's viewpoint. And you have your editor or your beta reader point out, well, if that person's not there, how could they know what was happening in that scene? And number one, we have, whenever I've talked to editors, whenever we've had different discussions about editors and publishers, the one thing that they always have to strike and mark is head hopping. When you have third-person viewpoint characters, but you're still bouncing around from each person's perspective, and you need to keep the viewpoint and the scene consistent. Now, fascinatingly enough, now I don't know when these are written, and obviously these are written for a 10-year-old, but today, of course, we are in a new correct error where he or she are not the only third viewpoints. Now, so that is another fascinating description, is this gives a reference to Alice in Wonderland, saying use third person point of view, he, she, or it, to tell this artist's story. But maybe science fiction authors have already spent a lot of time writing in different aliens or species that have multi-sexes or perspectives or something. But I would really love to read, books that maybe address contemporary issues of the different non-binary kind of pronouns and terms. So viewpoints and he, she, it, I, me, my seems like it's something easy and generic of, oh yeah, I know whose story I'm telling, and I know what viewpoint I'm writing in, and I know when to set it, and I know what to have them say and do. But hello, that's easier said than done. And we have to balance between, oh, I want to write it, I want to get the story out, to then having to go back and say, well, wait, then I have to worry about all the framework and all the constructs of the writing. What is this one? A firefighter. I know some romance author friends of mine who will immediately conjure up some juicy thoughts at just the thought of the firefighter. Hey, why not? There are many different examples of fiction: myth, parable, science fiction, young adult, and fantasy. Realistic fiction is when an author uses realistic characters and places to create a true-to-life story. Think carefully about a firefighter's profession. What kind of dangers might he or she encounter? Use realistic details to create a suspenseful story of a firefighter surviving a crisis and emerging as a hero. This actually, speaking of then romance, this reminds me of an old book that I picked up for 10 cents somewhere that I actually did a romance writing workshop with many years ago, where it was written in like the 80s, and it was very laughable now because it had things like, don't just have your woman be a nurse and not do anything. If she's a nurse, make sure you show her doing medical things. And it was like, well, obviously, again, that's another thing that maybe I think we forget about realistic details sometimes. Even when you're doing something in a fantasy and you're building your own world, in our writer heads, if we have different writer Bibles or journals or something, we know about aspects of the world and the person, but the reader does not. And so you have to put those things in. And sometimes, again, that's balance, because you don't want to have a ridiculous amount of exposition. You don't want, the alarm clock to go off and the person to, look in the mirror and describe themselves, that kind of cliche kind of exposition. But yet we need to have details. And, my grandfather was a firefighter, and I've been on fire trucks, but maybe some people haven't. And it's a fun experience. Somebody can go spend a day learning how to be a firefighter and sliding down one of the poles and how heavy the equipment is. So when you want to add realistic details, even in a fantastical setting, again, you still have to have that kind of experience. You have to do that kind of research. And I know some authors who have talked about firsthand kind of experience, but interviewing other firefighters and such, interviewing the expert kind of person. Our friend, Rabbi author Eileen Schneider, she actually took a police course because she wanted to be accurate on some of the facts, even though she was writing cozy mysteries about, local amateur detective. We need that kind of knowledge to be accurate, especially in today's world, because our reader has access to everything. And if we have any kind of information that's wrong or confusing or doesn't make sense, today, particularly with a Kindle, a reader can just, stop and go look it up. And that's the greatest fear a writer has. You never want a reader to stop and put the book down, because there's the risk that they will never go back to it, that you lose your reader trust, that they will never come back to you and your work. So we have to get the details right. Okay. Although I guess you can imagine what he looks like under his little uniform, because we don't know. Oh, this one I automatically think of Mulder and Scully, right? This just seems kind of like X-Files cosplay, right? In a fictional story, a character can be a person, animal, robot, or other non-human that acts like a human. The main character is the person about whom the story is written. Props, I do have to say that they didn't end that sentence with a preposition. because that's all casual slang that we know how to do today, right? Usually the main character is good and called the protagonist. A character who is against the protagonist, who is usually not so good, is called the antagonist. That is another thing today, maybe particularly with some of our new edgy television. We've really blurred the line between who is the protagonist, who is the antagonist, who is good, who is bad. We're more interested in exploring about the, anti-hero, or we like the bad guys. So when you're writing, it's kind of important for us, especially when we're doing the writing craft, to make the distinction between the two. And then as a reader, when you're reading something and the good guy suddenly turns bad, or the bad guy suddenly becomes good, all of a sudden it's kind of like a real mess. And if you haven't, set up that kind of, he's just misunderstood and now he's going to become a good guy and there's going to be a redemption arc, then, it's kind of messy and it's really kind of hollow. And no, again, that's what we don't want. We need to have, reasons for who's good and reasons for why who's bad. And I love those theories about, the bad person, the villain antagonist is the most frightening when they don't know that they're bad, or when actually what they say and what they think they're doing is right and has a grain of truth. And, that's, the power of books. As much as we do get some of that in great film and television, a lot of that interwoven kind of complexity can be read between the lines when you're reading a book. Look at the two characters. Pick one to be the protagonist and one to be the antagonist. In a one-page story, describe their conflict and how it ends. It's kind of funny because I had the preconceived notion that I thought these were, a his and hers kind of side-by-side working together. But here, the prompt is asking you to say which one's the good guy, which one's the bad guy, girl. Which is very interesting, that appearances themselves can be deceiving. And I love the old-fashioned Tolkien, when someone looks fair and feels foul, but then we can also be really fooled by kind of snake charmers and such. So that's a very interesting dichotomy to look at this, of who's good and who's bad. And then I think, again, maybe in our society we have the preconceived notion that, well, the woman must be good and the guy must be bad. And that, of course, is not necessarily the case. And again, that's a good practice, maybe, to give into the social expectations, to try and write something basic, but then also another good prompt is to try and do the complete opposite, to turn something on its ear. The woman who maybe should be so maternal is instead the one who's vicious. Right? Vicious is a good word. Now here's a nurse. There we go. A nurse who we see apparently doing nursing things because she's wearing scrubs, right? That's important for us to remember. Authors use direct characterization to tell the reader directly about a character. He was mean, unpleasant, and hated everyone. In indirect characterization, the reader must interpret information to understand a character. He walked through the room as he walked through life, grumbling and stepping on the cat's tail. Give this healthcare practitioner a fictional name and job. Make a list of direct characterizations about her work habits and personality. Make another list of indirect characterizations about her appearance and attitude. Then write a humorous story using these lists. That's so funny. I wasn't thinking of something humorous when I was thinking of writing about the character. I guess perhaps for a person who is a nurse, maybe it's easy. We've all had experiences where maybe we've not liked someone we've met at the doctor's office, or we've had a bad hospital experience. So it's easy to describe when the person was being nasty and said and did nasty things, or was rough maybe in their treatment. And then I guess if you're speaking indirectly, well, then it's the patients who are already talking about that person, or that doctor has a reputation, patients have stopped going to him or her. It's funny because I did not think of that as humorous. And yet, actually, I'm also thinking of the it's a few years old now, more than a few years old now, the Showtime show Nurse Jackie, where she's a good nurse. She's good to people, but yet she's also, into drugs and who knows, and all kinds of other shady dealings. And it's a dark comedy. It is kind of humorous about, the lengths she's going to in the show. But at the same instance, if you're thinking of a nurse and a nasty prompt, you're not necessarily thinking of it as humorous. because I guess hospitals can be a frightening, scary place, and I'm already thinking about horror instead of humor. So that's even something of a prompt, something that you may find scary, like the dentist perhaps, and how to make it humorous, like Mr. Bean going up and down on the dancing chair with the classical music playing. Oh, maybe is here another romance cliche? You know, the rugged lumberjack looking kind of guy with all his little power tools and stuff there. I don't know. We are bucking cliches with our prompts like we're 10 years old. Fictional stories can be written in either poetry or prose. Prose is a paragraph like everyday speech, but poetry is not written in paragraph form. It can rhyme or not rhyme, but the poem still tells a story with a beginning, middle, and ending. That's an interesting discussion, I guess, to have alone today about different writing formats and the way they've seemed to change. I like paragraphs, but when you're reading something like thriller or suspense, there's often, different breaks of short pulse kind of sentences, or even, one word kind of interruptions. And so that way what's actually on the page is mirroring what's happening in the action. And is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Do we have to have the physical writing of our paragraphs imitate some of our action? And poetry is a whole other world. Sometimes I find it weird when someone's poetry or dialogue rhymes. I mean, are we doing fantasy? Are we having Tom Bombadil where things have to rhyme? But at the same time, I think paragraphs have to have rhythm to them, and maybe that's another exercise. I should have done an exercise about sentence structure and diagramming sentences, because who else loves to diagram sentences? Nobody? Oh well. But when you're doing a paragraph, you can't have, obviously you don't want run-on sentences, but there's too many. You can't have too many compound sentences in a row, but yet all short sentences in a row don't sound right either. So that's another thing we have to pay attention to, that we don't necessarily have to have rhyme in our words, but we certainly have to have maybe rhythm or flow. And I am the kind of person, I'm of the habit, I read everything that I write out loud. That's always been like my number one tip to someone, that you have to, because you can't, well, for one, you're going to gloss over little mistakes and everything if you're just reading what you've written. But when you're reading it out loud, then you're not in your own writer head making little maybe connections and corrections inside your mind. You are seeing it as a reader would see it, which is important. And look closely at the photo of the lumberjack. Why is he smiling? What is his story? Write 4 or more paragraphs in prose to tell his tale. Then write the same story as a rhyming poem. There's an interesting exercise, I think, if we were looking at descriptions. Again, because we are beyond the cliche looking in the mirror at the person while they're telling us that they have blonde hair and, vermilion eyes, or, sand colored hair, obviously I do not look like that. But not only do we have questions when we're looking at something, and we want to know the old-fashioned who, what, when, where, and why is still very important. But if we're doing an exercise of a poem about a person, I think that is a great way to explore making sure that we're using different words. We don't teach vocabulary in classrooms anymore. And even when you want to, cheat and click on the synonyms or go look something up, maybe we don't find really unique and special words. But if you're trying to describe someone and you need to have rhymes, all of a sudden that's when we're creative and we're looking for unique words and unique ways to say things that are besides, a guy with a chainsaw. So I hope this wasn't too simplistic of an exercise, as we don't want to never talk down to our readers. Again, know your audience, know their level and what area you want your people to read. But I hope that getting a little back to basics with this little prompt here was something of a fun little exercise for everyone to enjoy and discuss. And I hope you are enjoying the HorrorAddicts.net Online Writers Conference. Again, even if you missed some of the live events, our horror, I don't even know the right link, horrorwriters.freeforms.net, I think is actually the proper URL. You can bookmark and go back. All the information still remains here, even when we're not having live activities. So that is our whole joy of presenting the conference in this format. I've done another video that does kind of explain some of the forum nature to it. Instead of having like, pitch mad, like some kind of live Twitter thing or some kind of instantaneous tune in now Facebook story where, oh, you miss it, big deal, sorry, you lost all the information, too bad. It didn't matter if it was 3 a.m. in your time zone. Oh, too bad, you need to be up on top of these things. No, that's not how we operate. I think that comes from our horroraddicts.net model, which is by horror addicts for horror addicts. So we have folks who are readers and writers, and our Next Great Horror Writer Contest winners and things like that are all here participating. So that way, we all come from different time zones. So that way we can all have information shared and exchanged. And it's archived here for everyone to read and enjoy and go back and continue to use some of the exercises and wisdoms. So you can follow all of our links. And for more of my videos and such, I'm also on Instagram at Kbatz Crafts. You can subscribe and follow and like. And you can keep up with all of our information in our horroraddicts.net submission calls on our blog at horroraddicts.net. And you can join our Facebook groups. We do have two. We have a regular horror addicts group where we talk about any form of horror, but we also have a Wicked Women Writers group that gets together. They have their own separate Facebook group, and that is about more female authors just getting together and chatting about different things. So there's lots of information to digest at the HOW conference. I hope you're having a good time here, and so please feel free to comment and share and discuss all your thoughts on writing and whatnot with us. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I guess I'll talk to you again. Bye.